Okay. Okay. Hello. Today we're doing our presentation on special interests. So basically what we're going to talk about is just like a short definition of them, and then the like community, like autistic community model versus like the medical and how they compare, and then effects that they can have on autistic people's lives, both like negatively and positively. And then we thought we could have a little like discussion at the end for questions and stuff. So the first one, definition, what are special interests? They're basically like a very brief summary of them is a very intense and extensive interest in a topic. It could be about anything like a school subject, piece of media, type of animal object. A really common stereotype, if you've heard the stereotype of like autistic people really like trains, that's like the most stereotypical special interest that I've heard. Yeah, they're commonly referred to in academic / medical fields as restricted interests. And it's estimated that around 75 to 95% of autistic people have special interests in some way. I included some gifs of some special interests I've had. So Pokemon, and then if anyone knows what Deltarune is, that's been another one. If you want to talk.
Yeah. So the way, like, I know a lot of people are probably thinking, like, everybody has things that they're into, especially kids. All the research I got here is a study, like, with a lot of data from youths and adults. But like everyone's thinking, everybody has interests, but studies have found both differences in like the intensity and the content of special interests versus like neurotypical interests. So first of all, a lot of like special interests are much more intense. It's like, for example, if someone is like a passing interest in like marine biology sounds interesting, you probably like know a few random cool facts to bring up, but if someone's special interest is marine biology, then it's like can list every scientific name of like a specific species and has watched like hours of documentaries and will like often put, like, I know for myself, like I've definitely put like special interests over like homework and like school projects, even though it's technically like the same amount of research energy, it's just brain wants to focus somewhere else. So that like in terms of the content of interests, autistic people are more focused on statistically factual information, playing games alone, collecting / hoarding things. I know this is a big thing that video games often provide, is like want to get all of the autistic urge to get all of the things. Cartoons, attachment to a particular object, item, and like sensory seeking activities, like maybe playing with specific games or toys. And then like things that were definitely more prevalent for neurotypicals are like other people being into like, you know, social drama and like what's happening in school or work or whatever. TV was more common in like teens, and sports was really low for autistic people, which makes sense considering like difficulties with motor coordination and all. But yeah, sports was like the #1 thing in the study that was like overwhelmingly neurotypical. And then in young adults, main interest being like religion, which makes sense because you kind of don't have a lot of hobbies as an adult. And yeah.
And then I think Sophia is talking about this.
Yeah. Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the community versus medical model a little bit. And yeah, how different people discuss special interests. And if you go to the next slide, thank you. So the community model definitely is just more positive. But here's a quote we found that says, "Studies increasingly suggest that the majority of autistic people feel enriched, not controlled by their interests." And, you know, whereas the medical model sort of frames this in a sort of like a deficit way, the community model is like a lot of times people, like this quote says, feel enriched. And yeah, special interests often facilitate communication / connection among autistics. And so yeah, autistic creators play a big part in fandom culture. I didn't know that, but yeah, definitely it's it's I think even just the term special interest is like a nice like way to kind of frame the community model. And the medical model, on the other hand, you know, some critics or yeah, whatever medical model believers say that yeah, belief that they distract from schoolwork or make it harder to fit in with peers. But again, that's just like choosing to focus on the like on the kind of negative aspect, and there's so many positive aspects. So anyway, and another interesting point someone put down is that interest may be categorized as inappropriate. So like, for example, adults having a fixation on cartoons or video games, you know, but again, that all is really just like socially sort of uh what's the word you know, yeah, constructed to like say that that's inappropriate. But yeah, that's just someone's passion. So anyway.
I think we're listening to this one.
Hey, I'm Mir. I'll be covering effects on me and Jay will be covering effects on life. And so for next slide. Yeah, so there's been like a lot of research done on whether or not special interests poorly or positively affect autistic people. I think overwhelmingly a lot of people say like this is a normal thing for autistic people. It's associated with an increase in well-being and life satisfaction. The same study that found that increase also did note that autistic people who reported a decrease in well-being if they became too devoted to their special interests, which I'll cover again in the negative effect side. And then a lot of autistic people report that their special interests are a reliable source of joy and comfort, and it's kind of like a shelter from the world, which I think is a really good way to discern between just like a neurotypical's hobby and like an autistic person's special interest, and that special interests are like a place where autistic people can go to recharge. It's really similar to stimming in that like a special interest helps autistic people channel their energy and gain like some kind of stimulation that really is enjoyable to them. And some more like productivity minded positive effects is that a special interest can lead to like a job or hobby expertise if a autistic person's special interest happens to be something that they can like capitalize on or just like use to like leverage a job in some industry. And it can also be like a source of pride, because when you devote so much time to something, you build like skills that you can be proud of because you've managed to put all this time to like becoming really good at this one thing. Regardless of whether or not you develop like amazing skills in a special interest, though, it can be a source of motivation and inspiration in day-to-day life. Some possible negative effects that were reported was there is a risk of developing addiction, especially because people who have autism also often are more likely to have comorbidities like anxiety and ADHD. I mentioned that special interest can be a shelter from the world, but some autistic people report that like when it gets like they can become dependent on their special interests to the point where like they shun the rest of their life, to a point that it negatively affects them, which is not guaranteed to happen, but it can happen. Some special interests may need to be redirected if they're dangerous. For example, if your special interest is like an illegal activity that like threatens your well-being, like it might be necessary to try to find a way to redirect that energy to a different special interest. And like previously mentioned, some special interests are considered socially taboo. We just covered like stigma in that really good presentation. And I think that on the internet, like some special interests are very much like connected to like the idea of like cringe and like something that's not acceptable. And so having special interests can definitely negatively affect your social life if people around you are not accepting of that part of you. And finally, like I previously mentioned, like it's really easy to fixate on a special interest. And a lot of autistic people report like if they get really into it, it gets to a point where they might neglect their basic needs. Like they don't realize that they need to go to the restroom, or they forget to feed their pet, which is definitely not the ideal situation. But I do want to emphasize the positive effects because I do think that a lot of research focuses on the negative effects. With that, I'll pass the microphone to Jay.
Sorry, I need to grab my thing. So yeah, I thought it would be interesting to show you guys how I navigate the world as a neurodivergent person, autism ADHD gang, because like personally, for reference, I thought this was kind of relatively normal until not that long ago. Basically, I use like video game, like I guess video games as like a framework or a roadmap to navigate the world. So like especially social situations. So I think when most people engage in a conversation, or when most neurotypical people engage in a conversation with a new person, the things that happen in the following conversation are kind of intuitive. You say something, the other person responds accordingly, you gauge the other person's reaction, blah, 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 blah. Apparently, I don't know. I've not experienced this. For me, I think about social scenarios as abiding by a lot of rules that I have to remember. To use like a computer science example, like every interaction has to be run through like an if-then statement. So if a person frowns at something that I said, that is a negative reaction, and I have to run like checks for like, was it at something that I said or was it at something that they were saying? If it's about something that was happening in their life, run comfort function and stuff like that. And you have to prepare all of these things to be like, okay, if person like, their voice is like lower than usual, negative, a lot of times it's just a shot in the dark. But this is obviously a lot of processes to run in your brain when you're just trying to talk to somebody, and it can get exhausting. So the way that I often think of things is like basically dialogue options in my favorite video games. So I put some examples up there. In terms of like interpersonal relationships, this is a big thing. I like taught myself in one of my favorite video games, Persona 5. Basically, you, the main character, can like develop relationships with a cast of other characters by like spending more time with them in game and like picking dialogue options that they would like. And the more time you spend with them, the more that they tell you about their own lives and things like that. And I kind of use that as like a way to remind myself not to just tell everything about myself to somebody on like the first time I meet them. And I'm like, oh, this must progress naturally. It must take 3 meetings for me to reveal this level 3 piece of information, because then it's often off-putting to meet someone for the first time. And then 3 minutes later, they're talking about like their like intense family history. And like managing tasks, I do this a lot, like where I will often like sort things I need to do. I mean, this is just a thing people do, right? You manage the things you need to do by like the necessity of the thing, by the deadline of when you have to do the thing, and then the reward for getting the thing. But that's boring. And I like thinking of it as like the most important things I have to do are in the main quest. Then we have like different side quests and then like bonus content. So like back in high school, like main quest is like, I gotta do this homework like today. Side quest is like email this teacher, or like an extra bonus quest would be like applying for a scholarship. Like I don't lose anything, but I'll get something extra. And then this Sims 4 example is one that I've used since I was a kid, because I've played The Sims for a really long time. And that, when you like say something that wasn't a good thing to say and somebody will react negatively to that thing. I had trouble and have always had trouble gauging when that is, or like someone's just not having a good time. So the way I thought about it since I was younger is like in The Sims, if two Sims are having a conversation, it'll show the type of conversation that they're having, like a happy conversation or like a flirty conversation. And then the things that you pick will be under different areas of like a funny thing to say, a mean thing to say. And if you say something mean, then it'll be like negative friendship. Friendship has decreased. So I'll often be like, okay, this person didn't react well to something I said. Our friendship bar decreased. I got to get it back up again. I got to change the indicator. And then in terms of self-care, earlier we talked about special interests not often, but have the capacity to lead you into only focusing on one thing for way too long of a time. So just like thinking about like in the context of video games, things like the hunger bar in Minecraft, and like the fact that in Stardew Valley they make your character go to sleep at 2 a.m. Is like brings me back to reality, and I'm like, hey, I should probably do those things. And yeah, I thought it was interesting that people don't think about things like this. So I wanted to put it in a presentation to kind of like contextualize that people's special interests, like at least for me, can be a way to like adapt. Like it can give you the tools and adapt those tools to understand like things in the world that aren't related to your special interests. Because for me, it's way easier to think about a video game than it is to think about a potentially stressful social scenario. So it's easier to learn. And yeah, that's what I put in the conclusion.
So finally, we just wanted to open it up to like any questions. We also have some quotes. Some of these appeared earlier, but we just thought we would take some quotes for that from articles that we found. And real quickly, these are just the references that we used. So I'll switch back to this one. So yeah, if that's basically the end. If there are any questions.
I know an adult who has watched Thomas in every language on YouTube. It is inappropriate to like Thomas as an adult. Guess what? He learned 12 languages and fluent in them. I love the video game analogy.
Do you visualize the video games too, or just
Sometimes like this little like music note thing, I made sure to find a PNG of that in there. I forgot to mention it. But in the example from Persona 5 earlier, if you pick like the best possible dialogue option, it'll give you 3 of those and it'll make a little noise. And you're like, yes, this character likes me. So sometimes, like if I'm talking to somebody that I want to be friends with and I say something that I can tell they enjoy, like that will pop up in my brain. I'll be like, yes, I got the or just like right now, like we react positively to the presentation. So, yes.
Thank you so much for sharing it.
Yeah, thank you.